That morning, the Los Angeles sky was clouded like frosted glass, with weak sunlight slipping through the massive windows of the international terminal, casting pale streaks across the polished floor. Ethan Maxwell stepped into the Skylux Airlines first-class check-in area, his charcoal suit tailored to fit his tall frame perfectly, his stride steady yet understated. At 48, Ethan carried not only the success of a global businessman, but also the history of someone who had risen from a beginning few believed would ever take shape. He had no need to assert himself through showiness. His composure was his most powerful statement. In his hand was a first-class ticket clearly marked Los Angeles, Tokyo, Seat 2B, the symbol of the premium service Skylux so proudly advertised. The check-in area was quiet, filled only with the sounds of rolling luggage and the occasional rip of a boarding pass from the printer. Monica Hayes, the lead flight attendant for that morning's flight, stood near the guest reception counter, her frame slender but her expression taut with a kind of cold-blooded confidence. When her eyes met Ethan's, they paused for half a beat, not in recognition of a loyal customer, but to weigh and assess. That brief silence was enough for Ethan to sense exactly what was passing through her mind. He handed over his ticket without any unnecessary words, just a light, courteous smile. But Monica's hand didn't reach for the scanner as it should have. Instead, with a decisive, icy motion, she tore the ticket in half, the scraps of paper falling onto the counter like a tangible insult. "You're in the wrong cabin," she said, her voice low but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "Economy is in the back, where the prices are more in line with what you can afford." The words drifted like a breeze, yet carried the full weight of raw prejudice. In that moment, time seemed to slow. A few eyes from the first-class lounge instantly lifted. A man lowered his newspaper slightly. A middle-aged woman tightened her grip on her purse strap. The air, once calm, condensed into a heavy silence. Ethan remained upright, his expression unchanged, his hand slowly gathering the torn pieces of the ticket. Without a word of protest, he simply nodded, walked past Monica, and headed straight into first class, finding seat 2B as if nothing had happened. But deep within, an undercurrent had begun to stir, silent, certain, moving toward a coming storm. Seat 2B was by the window, with an open view and a smoky gray velvet curtain that swayed faintly in the conditioned air. Ethan sat down, fastened his seatbelt, and gazed toward the runway where other planes were slowly taxiing. He didn't look back toward the cabin door, but he could still feel Monica's eyes on him, a gaze laced with both smugness and caution. For many, being publicly humiliated like that would ignite instant anger, but Ethan chose a different path. He understood that sometimes, timed silence was what unsettled an opponent the most. The soft hum of conversation began to rise around the cabin. A few passengers exchanged hesitant remarks, as though trying to piece together the story they had just witnessed. A young man with a neat frame and close-cropped black hair discreetly raised his phone, the lens aimed toward the counter. He was Daniel Cho, a well-known YouTuber whose work often tackled stories of social justice. A few rows away, Leah and Gwen, a familiar face in the online community with over 1 million followers, was scrolling quickly through her livestream apps, her gaze darting between Ethan and Monica. Monica entered the cabin, arms crossed, lips curled into a faint, unreadable smile. She stopped beside Ethan's seat, leaned just close enough for her voice to reach only him. "You think money buys you everything? Some of us still remember who truly belongs here." Without waiting for a reaction, she straightened and walked away, as if having completed a warning. Ethan didn't move, his gaze shifting just slightly, catching her reflection in the window glass. In one corner of the cabin, Victoria Lang, a platinum-haired woman in a cream Chanel dress, leaned toward Monica, whispered something, and discreetly slid a slim envelope into her hand. The motion was swift, but not missed by Daniel's slowly panning camera, which caught every detail. From economy, Isabella Ruiz had stood, pretending to pass through first class on her way to the restroom, her eyes meeting Ethan's, a silent, unmistakable signal that he was not alone. Ethan leaned back into his seat, his hands clasped loosely in his lap. He recalled the many times he had told the board that corporate culture was a more enduring foundation than any business strategy, that when a company allowed small lapses in attitude to become habit, it would rot from within. And now, here on a flight of the airline in which he held the largest stake, his warnings were on full display. The Boeing 787 remained still on the taxiway, the official reason being a 10-minute systems check. But for Ethan, 10 minutes was more than enough to form a plan, enough for the networks he had built over years to begin moving quietly into place. This was no longer just a personal insult. It had become a live test of the turnaround skills he had honed over hundreds of acquisitions and restructurings. And this, Ethan knew, was a test he would not fail. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin gradually shifted from awkward silence to a tense anticipation. Daniel Cho, his phone still discreetly hidden in his hand, adjusted the angle so the lens now pointed toward Ethan's seat and Monica's actions. He didn't need to say much. Just a few sharp, clear frames would be enough for the online community to write the rest of the story. Leah Nguyen, seated in the row beside him, leaned slightly into her phone's front camera, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes filled with disbelief and anger. The caption, #SkyLuxScandal Live from First Class, flashed on her screen, already drawing thousands of views. Monica either didn't notice or pretended not to. She was busy running her fingers over Ethan's seat control panel. A series of faint clicks followed. The seat motor stopped, the reading light went dark, and the call button for the flight attendant was disabled. "The seat's broken," she said in a sugary voice laced with mockery. "Safety first." A few passengers exchanged glances. They knew Ethan's seat had been working perfectly just minutes earlier. In the economy cabin, Isabella Ruiz had returned to her seat, opened her laptop, and connected to the airline's internal network. Her hands moved quickly, sending the first packets of data. Photos of Monica tearing up the ticket, a video of the envelope quietly sliding from one hand to another, and a copy of the passenger list confirming that Ethan Maxwell was assigned to seat 2B with full first-class privileges. In the row ahead, Victoria Lang sat back with her arms folded, wearing the contented look of someone who had just completed a smooth transaction. She tilted her head toward Monica, her voice low but not low enough to keep others from hearing. "Some people don't belong here, and we all know it." The words drifted through the cabin like a thin, sharp needle, piercing the senses of anyone still uncertain about what they had just witnessed. Travis O'Neill, seated at the service station near the cabin door, pretended to be focused on the tablet controlling the flight systems. In reality, the screen before him displayed passenger data, and seat 2B had just been flagged as invalid by an internal command. He knew exactly what he was doing and exactly who had suggested it. In his mind, this was a chance to score points with certain influential figures in the airline, people who had little fondness for the board reforms Ethan had been leading. Ethan sat still, his gaze fixed on the expanse of sky outside the window. He allowed the small actions and seemingly harmless remarks to unfold before him as if committing each fragment to memory for a much larger picture. Over the years, he had learned that wrongdoing rarely came in the form of dramatic shocks. It arrived through small, repeated acts, protected by silence and unspoken consent. And today, he was not just a witness, he was at the very center of it. A chime sounded from the back. Leah raised her phone and informed Daniel, "We've got over 20,000 viewers now." She didn't speak loudly, but just enough for a few nearby passengers to hear, their expressions changing, some tilting their heads, others quietly pulling out their own phones. The air had shifted. The injustice was no longer seen by only a few, it was spreading, with people watching, recording, and more importantly, willing to share. Isabella sent another email, this time to 3 news editors she knew were in the habit of checking their inbox even during vacations. The subject line was short: "Urgent evidence of discrimination and bribery on Skylux Flight 407. Attached was Daniel's video capturing Monica receiving the envelope from Victoria. At the end of the message, she added a single line: "This isn't just a personal story, it's a cultural one." Monica returned to Ethan's seat, wearing a smile so fake that even the least observant could see through it. "Would you like something to drink while we arrange your seat? Water, perhaps?" Without waiting for an answer, she filled a cup and suddenly tipped it so the liquid spilled down the front of his shirt and pants. "Oh, I'm sorry. Just a little accident." Ethan merely took a napkin, dried his hands, and placed it neatly on the table, his voice calm. "There are leaks far worse than this." The words were light enough not to sound like a rebuke, yet heavy enough to make Monica pause for a brief second before walking away. Miles Turner appeared in the aisle, holding another tablet. Without a word, he quietly showed Ethan the screen, the system log confirming that the order to disable his seat came from Travis's internal account, all time-stamped. Ethan gave a slight nod, no further comment, and handed the device back. The airline's announced 10-minute system check had yet to conclude. But in that short window, Ethan's network had already begun to move. Numbers, videos, and witness statements were being sent out like invisible threads, tightening the net bit by bit. His silence was not surrender. It was the space he gave his opponents to fully expose themselves. And Ethan knew that when he stepped forward, no one would be able to stop the wave that had already begun. Skylux Flight 407 remained still on the taxiway, the reason of system check, announced regularly over the intercom, like a polite mask hiding what was truly unfolding in the first-class cabin. Outside, the morning sun had risen high, streaming through the window glass into long golden streaks across the carpeted floor. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer mere discomfort or curiosity. Now every breath carried the sense that something was about to erupt. Ethan Maxwell sat calmly in seat 2B, fingers interlaced, back straight, eyes quietly following the runway as though observing a chess match from above. He didn't need to look around to know that every gaze was beginning to turn toward him, not because they recognized who he was, but because they could feel something about this man, a composure unbroken even when targeted in plain sight. Miles Turner leaned down, whispering just enough for Ethan to hear. "All the data is ready. We're just waiting for your signal." Ethan gave a slight nod, eyes still on the window. "Not yet. Let them think they're still leading the game." At the back, Isabella Ruiz typed a rapid sequence of commands on her laptop screen. In less than a minute, Skylux's central server recorded a login request from the admin override account, the highest access level reserved only for the security tech team. The gateway to the airline's internal data swung open, allowing her to pull every operation log for the flight, including the command that disabled Ethan's seat, the exact time Monica accepted the bribe, and even an audio clip from the cabin system capturing Victoria Lang's prejudiced remark. Leah Nguyen, still live streaming, glanced quickly at her phone screen, smiling in satisfaction as the view count passed 40,000. "They're asking who he is," she murmured to Daniel. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "They'll know soon enough." His voice blended into the steady hum of the aircraft engines, like a slow drumbeat waiting for its crescendo. Monica Hayes, sensing the weight of eyes beginning to scrutinize her, walked briskly towards seat 2B, her smile wider than necessary. "We've checked again. Your seat isn't on the valid list. You may have to move to economy to comply with regulations." The words were delivered slowly, as if she wanted everyone to hear them clearly. Ethan turned his head toward her, his gaze steady, voice low and clear. "Regulations? Interesting. I wrote part of those regulations." The answer made Monica hesitate for a moment, but she forced the smile to remain. "What do you mean?" Ethan didn't reply immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly toward Miles. "Begin." A soft beep sounded from the ceiling of the cabin, and suddenly, the large screen normally reserved for the safety video began to lower. A ripple of murmurs rose as the Aurora Global Holdings logo appeared, then shifted to the image of a grand boardroom in New York, the board of directors of Skylux Airlines. Faces in tailored suits stared directly into the camera, some frowning, others shifting uneasily in their seats. The voice of the board's chairman came through, deep and decisive. "Mr. Maxwell, we have received sufficient evidence. Your controlling shareholder authority is now activated for emergency action." In that moment, The first-class cabin seemed to tighten. Passengers who had not understood what was happening now did. The man who had been insulted and stripped of his first-class ticket before their eyes was not just a passenger, he was the one holding the fate of the airline in his hands. Victoria Lang snapped her head away, eyes searching in vain for an escape. Travis O'Neill lowered his tablet to his lap, fingers interlocked, lips pressed together. Monica remained standing, but her smile was gone, replaced by an emptiness in her eyes, the emptiness of someone who had just realized they had misjudged their opponent. Ethan rose slowly, not to intimidate, but like a deliberate ritual, marking the beginning of a takeover. "I usually join these meetings from my office," he said, his voice never rising. "But today I'm bringing it to the place where it most needs to be heard and seen, right here in this cabin." The screen shifted to a sequence of videos playing one after another. Monica tearing the ticket, the envelope changing hands, the seat being disabled, and the prejudiced remark. With each image, another layer of the false facade was stripped away. The murmurs turned into sharp intakes of breath and whispers heavy with outrage. Leah ended the live stream with a simple line, "You've just seen how justice begins." She switched off her phone, knowing the footage was enough to spread far beyond the confines of the motionless aircraft. Ethan returned to seat 2B, saying nothing more to Monica, Victoria, or Travis. He understood one principle clearly. In a contest of power, the moment you let your opponent realize for themselves that they have lost is far more powerful than any declaration of victory. And now, the first-class cabin of Skylux 407 had become the stage for that truth. The large screen remained lowered, its soft white light casting over the faces of everyone in the first-class cabin. The atmosphere now felt more like a courtroom than an aircraft cabin. The evidence being shown was not just still images, but relentless blows to the confidence of Monica, Victoria, and Travis. Every video clip and every system log displayed on the screen came with a timestamp, a login name, and the command source leaving no room to deny or blame a technical error. The voice of the board chairman came again, deep and uncompromising. "We proceed to vote now." Instantly, the shareholder voting interface appeared on the screen, 3 names standing out on the list: Monica Hayes, Chief Purser of Flight 407, Travis O'Neill, Systems Technician, Victoria Lang, Independent Investment Advisor. Next to each name were 2 boxes, green for Terminate Contract Immediately and gray for Retain Position. From the boardroom in New York, the members cast their votes one by one. On the screen, the green check marks appeared quickly, almost unanimous. In less than a minute, the results were clear: 87% in favor of immediate termination for all 3 involved. An automated announcement from Skylux's internal system followed, a female mechanical voice but with a cold edge. "Personnel notice: termination decisions are effective immediately. Security will approach the individuals involved upon landing." A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. Some passengers gave small nods. Others looked at Ethan with a mix of astonishment and respect. No one spoke aloud, but the mood had shifted completely, from the awkwardness of witnessing an uncomfortable incident to becoming witnesses of a transparent resolution, direct and without evasion. Monica stood frozen, her hand unconsciously gripping the edge of a seat, her fingernails leaving white marks. The confident smile from earlier was gone, replaced by a scattered gaze as if searching for something to hold on to in the cabin she once commanded. Travis kept his head bowed, fingers interlaced, occasionally pressing his lips together but saying nothing. Victoria, who always carried herself like the one holding the upper hand in any deal, now could only clutch her designer bag tightly on her lap, eyes fixed on the window as if she could escape the situation by removing herself from everyone's sight. Ethan didn't look at them directly. He kept his eyes on the screen, waiting for the notifications to finish. When the logo of Aurora Global Holdings returned against the deep blue background, he rose, straightened his jacket, and spoke, his voice steady and firm. "This is not revenge. It is a necessary correction. When a system allows behavior like this to exist, it needs to be cleaned from the root." In the economy cabin, Isabella Ruiz sent the final announcement to the entire internal communications network and the media outlets she had contacted earlier. The headline appeared right on the auxiliary cabin screen. Skylux Airlines controlling shareholder terminates personnel involved in discriminatory conduct and data fraud effective immediately. Seconds later, a passenger unlocked their phone and whispered, "CNN is running it live." Daniel Cho lowered his camera slightly, looking directly at Ethan. "They're watching more than we think. This won't just be an internal matter anymore." Ethan gave a small nod, his expression showing no satisfaction, only confirmation exactly as he had planned. The cabin speakers came to life, this time not with Monica's voice or any other flight attendant's, but a deep, clear male voice. "This is Richard Vaughn, Chief of Security for Skylux Airlines. The procedure to escort personnel off the aircraft will take place upon landing. We request all passengers remain seated." That message, though brief, made it clear that operational control of the flight had shifted away from those just found guilty before everyone's eyes. Monica turned toward Ethan, her lips parting as if to say something, but she stopped. Perhaps she understood that any words now would only be remembered as part of the verdict, and no defense could alter what dozens of eyes and thousands of live viewers had already witnessed. Ethan settled back into his seat, loosening his tie slightly. He knew that what had just happened was only the first step. A company does not change simply by firing a few individuals. It changes only when the entire structure is forced to confront the light of truth. And the first-class cabin of this flight had just become a vivid, undeniable example of that truth. The security director's announcement had barely faded when the cabin screen shifted to a deep blue, displaying the Aurora Global Holdings logo along with the words, "Controlling Shareholder Authority, Emergency Order." The air in the first-class cabin seemed to compress. Everyone could feel that a decision of far greater magnitude was about to be made, one that would not only affect the 3 people who had just been terminated, but potentially the entire airline. Ethan Maxwell sat still, his right fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the armrest, his eyes half closed as though contemplating a final move. Miles Turner leaned in, his voice low but firm. "All systems are ready. You only need to confirm." Ethan opened his eyes, and his gaze was not that of a passenger seeking justice for himself, but of a strategist about to give an order that could alter the course of an entire industry. He reached for the specialized tablet, its screen showing a secure interface with the words, "Atlas Protocol Fleet-Wide Suspension." This was not a command anyone could activate. It was linked to Ethan's biometric credentials, reserved solely for the controlling shareholder and discussed at the board level as a safeguard in the event of severe crisis. Without another word, Ethan placed his finger on the sensor, then pressed the blue icon in the corner of the screen. A short, deep sound resonated, solid and final, like a massive lock clicking shut. On the screen, a confirmation appeared. "Confirmed. Suspend all commercial flights of Skylux Airlines, excluding medical and rescue flights, effective immediately." At that same moment, in airports from New York, Chicago, and Seattle to Singapore, electronic departure boards began to change simultaneously, displaying delayed, canceled, or on hold. Ground staff exchanged confused glances as headsets crackled with concise instructions from headquarters. "Order from controlling shareholder, suspend all operations." In the first-class cabin, a few passengers exhaled sharply as if they had just witnessed the unimaginable. Leah Nguyen reopened her phone to see a flood of messages and notifications. Major news outlets were already broadcasting live, with a ticker running across the screen. "Skylux Airlines halts all global operations. Reason, ethical violations, and discrimination." Monica sat silently in the jump seat, her face gradually paling as she realized this was no longer a small internal incident, but an event that could destroy her career and personal reputation. Victoria Lang no longer tried to maintain her poised posture. She had sunk into her seat, gripping the handle of her bag tightly, eyes unfocused. Travis O'Neill's shoulders slumped as if both weight and support had been taken from him. Ethan set the tablet down on the table, then turned toward Monica, his voice even and deliberate. "Can you bring me that glass of water now?" It was not an attempt to exert dominance, but a cold confirmation that power had completely shifted. Monica rose instinctively, then stopped halfway and stepped back without a word. From the economy cabin, Isabella Ruiz stepped forward, handing Ethan an electronic dossier that had already been sent to every board member and the legal department. "All records have been locked in the server and forwarded to regulators," she said. "We will proceed with a full review of the airline's operations and hiring practices." Ethan nodded, showing no satisfaction, only the acknowledgement that a necessary step had been taken. Daniel Cho kept filming, murmuring into the lens, "We just watched a man who didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to threaten, but with a single order, he stopped an entire airline." And viewers watching the live feed immediately flooded the comments, many calling it a turning point for the global aviation industry. Outside the window, sunlight reflected off the aircraft's fuselage as though the Boeing stood still to bear witness to this historic moment. Ethan leaned back and closed his eyes for a few seconds, not to rest, but to shape his next move. For him, halting all operations was only the means. The true goal was to rebuild a system with no place for what he had witnessed this morning. The first-class cabin had fallen into an unusual stillness after the order to freeze all operations of Skylux Airlines. The steady hum of the engines now seemed to fade into the background, underscoring an atmosphere that everyone understood was shifting from chaos to something deeper and longer, lasting. Faces still carried traces of shock from what had just unfolded, yet in many eyes there was something new, a sense of anticipation. Ethan Maxwell leaned slightly toward Miles Turner and received the secure tablet once more. The display no longer showed the Atlas protocol screen used moments earlier to halt the fleet, but a new control panel titled AeroGuard Real Time Bias and Compliance Monitoring System. He opened a file, enlarging it so nearby passengers could see. "This," he said, his voice low and clear, "is the next step, not just fixing the damage, but preventing it at the root." Ethan explained that AeroGuard was an artificial intelligence platform developed by Aurora Global Holdings, capable of monitoring behavioral data from frontline employees, flight attendants, ground staff, technicians, and detecting patterns of bias, fraud, or procedural violations in real time. Isabella Ruiz stepped forward to add, "Every interaction with a passenger will be recorded and analyzed immediately. If there's any sign of irregularity, whether accidental or deliberate, the system will alert oversight teams and store it as evidence. There will be no more small mistakes quietly overlooked." Her voice was steady and clear, each word landing like stones paving the road ahead. Leah Nguyen, still streaming live, panned her camera from the tablet screen to Ethan's face. "And this will apply to every airline in your group?" Ethan gave a small nod. "Not just airlines. Any service industry where bias and personal power can harm others. Hotels, transportation, healthcare, all of it." Daniel Cho stepped into the frame, his excitement unhidden. "So this means, from now on, if someone is treated unfairly, they won't have to wait for the media to get involved. The evidence will already be automatically recorded?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Exactly. Justice will no longer depend on the luck of whether someone managed to film it." In a nearby seat, a middle-aged man, a passenger who had been silent for the entire flight, gave a small nod, his eyes glistening. "I lost faith in internal reporting systems long ago. If this really works, it will change the way we live." His voice trembled slightly, but was loud enough for several around him to hear. Ethan rotated the tablet back toward himself and tapped a confirmation button. A message appeared. AeroGuard officially deployed, global press release issued. At the same time, phones and tablets throughout the cabin lit up with news alerts. Aurora Global Holdings launches AI bias monitoring system immediately following incident on Skylux Flight 407. Digital news outlets, as well as financial and technology channels, picked up the story instantly, pairing images of Ethan in the first-class cabin with bold headlines. "From crisis to reform, a controlling shareholder changes the rules." Monica, Victoria, and Travis. Those who had just lost their positions remained still, but it was clear they understood this story had grown far beyond them. This was no longer about their disciplinary action. It was the birth of a system that would leave no room for the kind of behavior they had just displayed. Isabella received an urgent message from the Department of Transportation, a formal invitation to discuss implementing AeroGuard as a standard tool for the national airline industry. She handed the screen to Ethan, who scanned it briefly before nodding. Make it open source. This technology isn't to protect a brand, it's to protect people. That statement made the cabin, though enclosed and holding only a few dozen people, feel like a forum where a new principle had just been declared. There was no loud applause, but there were slow nods, shifted gazes, and the sense that everyone had just witnessed a milestone that would be remembered long after this plane landed. Ethan closed the tablet and leaned back in his seat, his eyes still sharp but softened slightly. He knew that from this point on, the story was no longer in his hands. It would spread, be tested, be challenged, and if strong enough, would become part of the new standard for the entire industry. And that was the victory he had aimed for from the very beginning. The lighting in the first-class cabin had softened, the warm golden hue from the LED strips on the ceiling reflecting down and pushing the earlier tension a few steps into the background. But everyone knew this was not the calm of forgetting. It was the stillness of a moment already etched into memory. Ethan Maxwell sat upright, taking in the cabin as though every detail, from the glances of passengers and the faint tapping on phone screens to the slow, measured breathing of those still reeling from the shock, was becoming living data for his mind to store. When the pilot's announcement came over the speakers, the brief statement, "We will return to the gate to disembark passengers," surprised no one. As the plane began to taxi slowly back toward the terminal, Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt and rose with deliberate slowness. He didn't need to tap a seat back or signal for attention. Every eye had been on him from the moment he moved. Taking a few steps forward, he turned to face the entire cabin, his voice low but carrying clearly. Today, you witnessed a chain of events that began with a small act, a ticket torn, and escalated into a systemic issue. The only difference is that we did not let it disappear into silence. He paused, letting the words settle into the stillness that had taken hold. Ethan glanced toward Monica, Victoria, and Travis. His eyes held no malice, but they offered no comfort either. You will leave this plane, and I'm sure you will have time to reflect on your choices. But I want to make one thing clear. Your names will not vanish. They will be in training materials, in policy documents, in mandatory workshops, not to shame you, but to remind everyone that a system collapses when no one speaks up. A man seated mid-cabin gave a small nod, his eyes solemn. Leah Nguyen, still holding her phone, recorded every word, her lips pressed together as if she understood she was capturing something of lasting value. At the back, Daniel Cho quietly lowered his camera, letting the moment live not just in images but in the emotions of those who had been there to see it. Ethan continued, his voice slower now but no less sharp. This airline will fly again, but when it does, it will carry a new culture, one where passengers need not worry about being judged by the color of their skin, their name, or their clothes. If we do it right, there will be no need for a phone to record evidence, because there will be nothing left to record. Isabella Ruiz stood silently toward the rear, her eyes following Ethan's every move. She knew these words were not just for today's passengers, but would be quoted in articles, conferences, and training programs for years to come. Ethan's gaze moved across the cabin, pausing briefly on each group of passengers, as though he wanted to commit them to memory. Those who had watched in silence, those who had the courage to record, and those whose attitudes shifted once the truth emerged. Then he gave a small nod, like a period at the end of a brief speech, before returning to seat 2B. The taxi back to the terminal took less than 10 minutes, yet in the cabin time seemed to slow. Some passengers exchanged glances, a few typed quick notes into their phones. No one spoke loudly, The respect in the air was almost tangible. When the plane came to a stop and the door opened, airline security personnel and members of the board stepped inside. Monica, Victoria, and Travis were asked to stand. They walked down the narrow aisle between rows of seats, no longer receiving polite nods, but instead meeting cold or distant stares. No one took photos. No more images were needed. The story was already complete. Ethan remained seated, waiting until all other passengers had disembarked. When he finally stepped off last, carrying his leather briefcase, there was no expression of triumph, only the calm of someone who had completed a task. In the jet bridge, a few passengers waited to shake his hand or give a small nod of thanks. He responded to each, unhurried, missing no one. Outside the terminal, the press and media crews were already gathered. But Ethan did not stop to answer immediately. He spoke only one short sentence, enough for the microphones to catch clearly. "We cannot change the past, but we can build a future where what happened today cannot happen again." Then he kept walking, leaving behind the sound of camera shutters and the questions that had yet to be asked. From the perspective of someone who has witnessed dozens of organizations, large and small, navigate defining turning points, I understand that a business is only truly sustainable when it has the courage to confront its own weaknesses. Real power does not lie in the ability to punish swiftly, but in building a system where violations have no chance to happen again. And sometimes, to change an entire industry, all it takes is one moment powerful enough to make the world stop, look, and ask again, what are we really operating for? If today's story has made you believe more strongly in the power of transparency and responsible action, hit like and subscribe so we can continue dissecting the stories that truly redefine the rules of the game. Before you leave the video, drop a comment with the phrase "no silence," as a reminder that justice only exists when someone dares to speak up.